We tell people to do the right thing. We say it all the time. Stand up for what matters. Help when you can. Be the kind of person the world needs more of. And most people don't. Not because they're bad. Maybe they just can't be bothered. Or maybe they found out what happens to people who do. This video is about 5 of those people who did the right thing and were ultimately punished for it. These are ordinary people, a lifeguard, a waitress, a nurse, a bank manager, and a woman who donated a kidney, and every single one of them lost their job for it. After working at a restaurant for 11 years, you get to know the place, right? You know which tables will wobble, you know the regulars by name, you know which cooks are in a good mood and which ones you probably don't want to bother before noon. Well, Victoria Hughes had been working at an IHOP in Lakeland, Florida since 2013. 11 years. That's not a job at this point, right? It's kind of like her rhythm. It's a life that she built around early mornings and double shifts and knowing exactly how that place operates. And all that time, she'd seen about everything. The late night crowds, the Sunday rushes, the good tippers, and the terrible ones too. The people who made a mess and the people who thanked her by name. But on Sunday, November 24th of 2024, a man walked in with nothing in his pockets and nothing in his stomach. Now, she could have done what most people do in a situation like that, right? They smile, they politely say she can't help, and maybe points him towards the door, or maybe even a nearby shelter, or maybe just avoid eye contact and hope they leave on their own. But she didn't do any of that. She said, without a second thought, I bought him a stack of pancakes and gave him water. That's it. She paid for the pancakes herself, not using the restaurant comps. She simply paid for a stack of pancakes and gave him a glass of water. She didn't sneak around it. She told her manager she was upfront about the whole thing. But that is when things shifted. The manager wasn't happy. The concern wasn't really about the food. It was about what it might lead to. The manager told her that feeding someone like that could lead to loitering issues, that it could become a safety concern for other customers. But later that same day, the same man came back, and this time he brought a family with him, and the family wanted to buy him another meal. And in every version of the story that got reported, that moment of him coming back, it's described the point where the manager's frustration really intensified. And 2 days later, Victoria got a phone call from her manager. She was fired. But what was the reason? Victoria asked, for what? And the 2 words that came out of the manager's mouth was company policy. Now let that sink in for a second. Thanksgiving 2024 fell on a Thursday, November 28th. She was let go 2 days before Thanksgiving. After 11 years over pancakes she bought herself. So the next day, November 27th, Victoria launched a GoFundMe. And the way she describes it tells you everything about where her head was at. She wrote that she had just been recently fired from a job that she worked at since 2013 and was publicly humiliated for feeding a homeless man. And she wasn't being dramatic, right? She wasn't trying to start a movement. She was just asking for help to get through the holidays. But her story was moving. Local news picked it up first, and then it went national, then international. And the reaction was about as unanimous as the internet ever gets. People were furious because no matter how you spin it or what corporate language you wrap it in, the headline is the same. A woman with over a decade of service bought a hungry man breakfast with her own money and got fired for it. And once that story had legs, the system kicked into damage control. At the franchise level, the IHOP location Victoria worked at was operated by a company called Sunshine Restaurant Partners. Their CEO put out a public statement and it promised employee training around food insecurity, donations to Feeding America, contributions to local Lakeland charities. But you can notice what the statement didn't include. It didn't confirm what the policy actually was. It didn't even say, here's the rule she broke. It didn't produce a page in the handbook saying you can't buy a homeless person a meal. It just pivoted to charity. And then IHOP's corporate office reached out to Victoria directly. The offer was straightforward. She got her job back, compensation for the shifts that she missed, and was described as gaining a healthy donation to a charity of her choice. On paper, that checks every box, right? It's the textbook corporate response. Something blows up locally, goes viral, and then headquarters steps in to reverse the headline. But Victoria said no. As of December 12th, 2024, reporting confirmed that she turned the whole thing down. And that's the part that really sticks with me. Because Think about what she was being offered, right? Her job back, some back pay, a donation in her name. Most people might take that deal. Most people would probably feel relieved. But she understood something that I think a lot of us feel, but don't always say out loud. The damage wasn't about money. It was never about money. It was about what the firing said. It was about the message behind it. Those 11 years of loyalty meant less than a stack of pancakes. That doing something kind, doing something instinctively human, was a fireable offense. Because the only reason anyone even tried to make it right was because a camera showed up. If no one had posted that GoFundMe, if no local reporter had picked up the phone, if the story had just stayed quiet, she would still be fired. She'd still be gone, another name erased from a schedule. But here's the thing that should probably bother us all. In all that reporting, in every article, every interview, every statement, no one ever produced the actual written policy Victoria Hughes supposedly violated. Not IHOP corporate, not the franchise, not the manager. The closest we ever got was the manager's words as Victoria described them. Company policy. That's it. The whole basis for ending an 11-year career. A policy no one can show you. For a meal she paid for herself.
I need my job, but I would still do it again. I truly would. I would still help somebody if I could. If he asked me for my shirt, I probably would have tried to give him that too.
Victoria Hughes bought a man Pancakes, and it cost her job that she'd worked for 11 years. And that's just the first story. Alright, so here's a question. If you're a lifeguard and someone is drowning, do you save them? That shouldn't require any thought, right? That shouldn't involve a phone call to a supervisor. That shouldn't depend on which stretch of sand you're standing on, right? But in July of 2012, a 21-year-old lifeguard named Tomas Lopez found out that for some employers, that answer isn't that simple. Tomas was living in Davie, Florida, and was working as a lifeguard on Hollandale Beach, a beautiful and vibrant stretch of coastline just north of Miami. It's the kind of beach that most people picture when they think of Florida. Sun, sand, tourists. But Hollandale Beach had a setup that kind of matters in this story. The lifeguards weren't employed by the city. They were employed by a private contractor, a company called Jeff Ellis Management. And the contract was very specific. The company was paid to cover a designated protected area of the beach. Outside that area, the sand was marked with signs that said, "Swim at your own risk." And the company's policy was clear. If something happens outside the protected zone, you don't go. You call 911. You just stay at your post. On paper, that's a liability decision, right? It's a coverage decision. It's the kind of rule that makes sense in a boardroom. On the beach, with a man drowning 1,500 feet away, it means nothing. Monday afternoon, July 2nd of 2012, Tomas was at his post when a beachgoer runs up to him. Someone was in trouble in the water south of his position in the unprotected area, the swim at your own risk zone. Tomas didn't call 911. He didn't radio his supervisor. He didn't check the policy manual. He just ran the 1,500 feet down the beach into the water to a man who was drowning. Thomas helped provide aid alongside an off-duty nurse who happened to be nearby. They kept him stable until paramedics arrived. The rescue worked. The man was hospitalized and then later released. He survived. Tomas went back to his post. He filled out an incident report and did everything by the book after the fact. But then he was fired. The reason was exactly what you'd expect. He left his assigned zone. He violated the coverage boundary.
I'm drowning. I'm looking like I don't see anyone. It's like they're way down over there. They're way down over there. So I just started running.
A man was drowning, a lifeguard saved him, and the company's concern was the rescue happened on the wrong patch of sand. Now, if the story had ended there, it would already be absurd, but what happened next made it worse. When other lifeguards at the beach heard what happened to Tomas, they spoke up. Several of them said publicly that they would have done the same thing. That if someone was drowning outside the zone, they would go. Some of them were fired for saying that. Others quit on the spot. Now think about that. The company didn't just punish the guy who made the rescue. They punished the people who said they would have made the rescue as well. That message wasn't subtle and it wasn't between the lines. It was right there in the open. Coverage matters more than lives. Stay in your zone. Let someone else deal with it. And that story hit the local news first and then everywhere else. And the reaction was immediate and overwhelming because this wasn't a gray area. This wasn't a complicated ethical dilemma with two reasonable sides. A lifeguard wanting to save a drowning man and then being fired for stepping out of bounds. That's the story. And within days, the contractor scrambled. Jeff Ellis Management came out and said the supervisors had acted too quickly. They offered Tomas his job back, full reinstatement, and a public acknowledgement that the firing was a mistake. And guess what Tomas said? No. The only reason they offered him his job back was because the cameras showed up. If no one had reported the story, he'd still be fired. The fix wasn't about doing the right thing, right? It wasn't about saving a man's life out of bounds. It was about managing the headline. Meanwhile, the city of Hollandale Beach, which remember, had nothing to do with the firing because Tomas worked for the private contractor, not the city. Hollandale Beach took a very different position. City officials said publicly that aid should be rendered regardless of the zone in which it happens. They commended Tomas. They called the rescue exactly what it was. And on July 9th, 1 week after the rescue, Hollandale Beach held a ceremony at City Hall. They gave Tomas Lopez a key to the city, and the man he pulled from the water was there to thank him in person. A key to the city for doing his job because his employer had fired him for it. As for the contractor, the fallout didn't stop. Within days of the ceremony, Jeff Ellis Management announced that they would not be seeking future contracts with Hollandale Beach. They'd finish out the existing agreement, which ran through September 30th, and then they were done. Some reports called it a resignation. Others called it what I think we all clearly know what it was. This company had no more credibility left in that town. And in this story, the system works. Eventually, the public reacted, the city responded, and the contractor was held accountable in the only way that it mattered, by losing the contract. But none of that was guaranteed, right? None of that was automatic. If the story hadn't gone public, if no reporter had picked up the phone, if no one had posted about it online, Tomas Lopez would just be a 21-year-old kid who got fired from a beach job. And the policy says, let them drown if they're outside the line, would still be quietly in place. He did the most obvious right thing a lifeguard can do. He saved someone's life. And the only reason it didn't destroy his reputation is because the rest of the world was watching. But not everyone gets that kind of spotlight. So here's something most companies will tell you. If you see something wrong, report it, right? If you see something, say something. Use the hotline, follow the process. We have systems in place. We'll protect you. Claudia Ponce de Leon did exactly that. She followed the system, she used the hotline, and she reported what she saw. And 21 days later, she was fired. In June of 2011, Claudia was promoted into a branch management role at a Wells Fargo located in Pomona, California. It was a step up, more responsibility, more visibility, the kind of move that's supposed to mean the company believes in you. But once she was inside that role, once she could actually see how the numbers were being made, something didn't add up. The branch was hitting sales targets, accounts were being opened. On paper, everything looked great, but the paperwork told a very different story. Phone numbers that didn't work, the same email addresses showing up on multiple accounts. What she was looking at, and what she later described in federal filings, was gaming. Employees were opening accounts that customers hadn't asked for. Not because the employees were criminals, but because the sales quotas were so aggressive, they were so relentless, that she later said it was virtually impossible to meet the goals without cheating. The pressure wasn't a bug in the system, it was the system. Now Claudia had no choice. She could look the other way, she could hit her numbers, keep her promotion, and pretend the math made sense, and a lot of people in her position did exactly that for years. But she didn't. On September 7th of 2011, she picked up the phone and called Wells Fargo internal ethics line. She reported what she was seeing, the suspicious accounts, the fake paperwork, the pressure that was driving all of it. She did the thing the company tells you to do. She followed the process, and 21 days later, she was fired. And the reason Wells Fargo gave, it wasn't about the accounts, it wasn't about the ethics call. According to the later federal filings, The bank claimed her termination was based on personal misconduct, including allegations that she drank excessively. Federal investigators would later find no evidence to support that, but in the moment, that didn't matter. She was out, and the faked accounts kept going. In December of 2011, Claudia filed a formal whistleblower complaint with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. She laid out what she'd seen, what she reported, and what happened to her afterward. But then she waited. She waited years, because here's the part of whistleblower stories that nobody talks about. The filing is the easy part. What follows is a slow, arduous process for most people because they don't have the resources or the stamina to survive. And while Claudia waited for her case to move through the federal system, the fraud that she tried to report in 2011 from one branch in Pomona kept spreading. It spread to thousands of branches, millions of accounts. On September 8th of 2016, 5 full years after she was fired, regulators finally dropped the hammer. The numbers were staggering. Employees had opened more than 2 million deposit and credit card accounts that customers never authorized. 2 million! The sales targets she had flagged in a single branch of Pomona turned out to be the engine behind one of the largest consumer banking scandals in American history. 12 days later, on September 20th, Wells Fargo CEO John Stump sat before the Senate Banking Committee. He was grilled on national television about the culture of pressure, the quotas, the fraud, and it became one of those public accountability moments that people actually remember. And somewhere in the background of all of that, while senators were asking tough questions and headlines were running wall to wall, there was a woman in Southern California who tried to tell them 5 years earlier. She called the ethics line, she reported the fraud, and she was fired for it. It took until July 21st of 2017, nearly 6 years after her termination, for the federal system to catch up. OSHA issued its order. Wells Fargo was told to reinstate Claudia and pay her more than $577,000 in damages. Investigators had reviewed the case and found what she'd been saying all along. Her firing was a retaliation for reporting suspected fraud. 6 years, that's how long it took for some official to say she was right. But even then, it wasn't over. Wells Fargo fought the order. They announced that they would appeal. Reports indicated they refused to reinstate her even though federal rules said the reinstatement was supposed to be immediate. Now think about that for a second, right? A company that had already been fined billions, a company whose CEO had already been dragged before Congress, a company that had publicly apologized and promised to change, was still in 2017 fighting the reinstatement of a woman who had tried to stop the fraud before it became a national scandal. The case finally ended in early 2018. On January 12th, Claudia and Wells Fargo reached a confidential settlement. Her attorney confirmed the resolution, but the terms were never made public. A few months later, on April 11th, a Department of Labor judge formally approved the settlement and dismissed the case. A quiet ending, sealed terms, no public reckoning. And that's the pattern, right? The company gets its headlines, the executives get their hearings, and the fines get paid, eventually. And the person who actually stood up first, the person who called the ethics line when it could have made a difference, they get a settlement with a confidentiality clause and 6 years of their life that they'll never get back. Claudia saw the fraud, she reported the fraud, and she was fired in just 21 days. And the system she trusted to protect her took 6 years to prove that she was right. But at least her case had an ending, right? At least there was an investigation, and at least someone eventually looked at the evidence and said the retaliation was real. Not everybody gets that. The first 3 stories in this video are about individuals. One person does the right thing, one person gets punished. This story is a little different. This one is about a system, and what makes it worse is that the people the system was built to serve, the people specifically created to protect, were veterans. To understand what happened, you need to understand one number: 14 days. That was the target. The Veterans Affairs healthcare system had a goal. When a veteran needed an appointment, they should be seen within 14 days. It was written into policy and it was built into performance plans. and it became the number at which VA facilities across the country were judged. On paper, it sounds reasonable, right? 14 days, that's 2 weeks. That's a fair benchmark for getting a veteran in to see a doctor. The problem was that the benchmark wasn't being met. Not even close. And instead of fixing the actual problem, not enough doctors, not enough appointments, not enough capacity, some facilities found a different solution. They fixed the numbers. At the Phoenix VA healthcare system in Arizona, staff were being told to manipulate the scheduling data. Supervisors would pull reports, identify any appointments that had exceeded the 14-day window, and instruct schedulers to fix them. What that meant in practice was rescheduling the appointment on paper so it appeared to fall within the target. The veteran was still waiting, but the data said that they weren't. The VA already had an official tracking system, the electronic waitlist. The rules were very clear. If a veteran couldn't get an appointment due to capacity, they were supposed to be added to that list. No other waitlists were being used. That was written policy. But in Phoenix, veterans were being kept on paper printouts, informal tracking sheets, and side lists that didn't feed into the official system, which meant that a veteran's wait didn't officially start until they were finally entered into that electronic system, sometimes weeks or months after they'd first tried to get the appointment, and veterans were suffering because of it. Care was being delayed, conditions were worsening, and in some cases, people were actually dying while they waited for appointments that the system said they already had. Multiple employees inside the VA saw what was happening. Doctors, nurses, administrators, they weren't guessing. They were watching it happen every day. And some of them reported it. They went through the proper channels and they followed procedures they were supposed to follow. One physician at the Phoenix VA became one of the most prominent voices. He spoke to journalists, he described what he was seeing from the inside, and his accounts helped ignite the national story. But he wasn't the only one. Other employees raised concerns about patient safety, about data manipulation, about a culture that rewarded silence and punished honesty. And the retaliation came. Some were reassigned, some were isolated, and some were pushed out. The details varied from person to person, but the pattern was the same. If you spoke up, you paid for it.
The VA, in my opinion, has routinely intimidated any employee who brings forth information that is contrary to the public image that the VA wishes to project.
On July 20th, 2014, Congress held a hearing about whistleblower retaliation inside the VA, and the testimony wasn't polished or diplomatic. It was raw. One of the witnesses straight up said that retaliation was alive and well inside the VA. No sugarcoating, no corporate language, just this is how it is. And these weren't random people with an axe to grind, right? These were doctors, nurses, people who went into medicine to help veterans were now sitting in front of Congress explaining that trying to help was exactly what got them punished. But here's the thing that really made the country pay attention. The VA had its own internal watchdog, the Office of the Inspector General. And when they finally went into the Phoenix facility and pulled the actual data, what they found was, it was hard to believe. Phoenix had been reporting that new patients were waiting an average of 24 days for a primary care appointment. That's the number the system was showing, 24 days. But the real number was 115. It's not a gap, it's not a lie, it's almost 5 times what they were claiming. And it wasn't some computer error, right? People were being told to make those numbers look better. Supervisors were literally pulling up appointments that had gone past the 14-day target and telling staff to fix them, which just meant make the data say something different. The veteran is still waiting, but now the spreadsheet looks fine. But it got worse, because the investigators also found about 17 different veterans who were waiting for care and weren't on any list at all. Not the official one, not the backup one, nowhere. The Inspector General's language for that was pretty chilling. They were at risk of being lost or forgotten. And think about that. You served your country, you came home, and you went to the system that was supposed to take care of you, and the system literally lost your name. And 2 days after that report dropped, the VA Secretary, Eric Shinseki, was gone.
I can take responsibility for it, and I do. So given the facts I now know, I apologize as the senior leader of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
And the president made it clear that this wasn't just a Phoenix problem. This was everywhere. What followed were months of what you'd expect. Senate hearings, House hearings, more investigations at the facilities, places in Wyoming and Colorado where data manipulation was happening. And eventually, the VA did the one thing that actually made sense. They got rid of the 14-day metric. 13,000 employee performance plans were rewritten because if the target is what makes people cheat, then get rid of the target. So the system corrected itself eventually, but the whistleblowers, in September of 2014, the VA quietly settled with 3 of them. They got to keep their jobs, some were moved to different roles, and the government called it full and fair relief. But the actual terms are confidential like always. 3 people, 3 settlements, out of who knows how many tried to speak up and got shut down so quietly that none of us ever heard their names. And that's what I keep coming back to with this story. The scandal got fixed, sort of. The metric got removed. Leadership changed and Congress got their sound bites. The system moved on. But the people who actually said something first, the ones who saw veterans getting lost in the cracks and couldn't live with staying quiet, didn't get a parade. They got investigated. They got dragged through months of retaliation before anyone with power decided to care. And the real message was simple. If you see something wrong, be careful about saying it out loud, because this system will protect itself long before it protects you. And that brings us to our last story. Let me know in the comments which one resonated with you the most, because this one is not about policy or a system or a corporate liability calculation. It's about one person giving away a piece of themselves. Literally, physically, and finding out that it wasn't enough. I want you to think about the biggest favor you've ever done for someone. Maybe you've helped a friend move. Maybe you loaned them some money that you aren't sure you'd ever get back. Maybe it was covering a shift on a day you really needed off. Now, imagine giving somebody a piece of your body. Not metaphorically or symbolically. A surgeon cuts you open, removes one of your 2 kidneys, and that kidney goes into a chain of donors so that your boss, your direct supervisor, can get the transplant she needs to survive. That's what Debbie Stevens did, and here's how it started. It started with a conversation. Deborah had been working as a clinical worker at the Atlantic Automotive Group, a billion-dollar company that operates several new car dealerships on Long Island. Her boss was a woman named Jackie Bruscia, one of the controllers for the company. In June of 2010, Deborah left the company to move to Florida. Life moves on, but in September, she came back to Long Island for a visit and stopped by her old office to say hello. That's what you do when you leave a place on good terms. You just drop in. And that's when Jackie told her. During the conversation, Jackie mentioned her health problems and the fact that she needed a kidney transplant. She said she had a possible donor lined up, a family friend, and it was being handled. And Deborah told her boss that if it ever came down to it, she'd be willing to donate. She said it the way a kind person says it, naturally, without really thinking through what it would mean. And Jackie's response was simple. You never know. I may have to take you up on that offer one day. Not long after the visit, Deborah decided to move back to Long Island. She reached out to Jackie about getting her old job back, and Jackie hired her. And within weeks, Deborah was back at the Atlantic Automotive Group working under the same boss she'd casually offered her own kidney to over small talk. 2 months later, Jackie called Deborah into her office. My donor was denied. Were you serious when you said that? And just like that, a casual offer made during a friendly visit became a very real deal. Deborah said yes. Now, here's where most retellings of the story get a detail wrong, and it matters. Deborah wasn't an exact biological match for Jackie. Their blood and tissue types didn't line up for a straightforward transplant. So instead, the donation went through what's called a paired exchange, a kidney chain. And here's how it works, in case you don't know. When a willing donor isn't compatible with their intended recipient, the system matches them with an other donor-recipient pairs. Deborah donated her left kidney to a stranger, a recipient in St. Louis, Missouri, and through that chain, a donor in San Francisco provided the kidney that went to Jackie. So she didn't hand her kidney directly to her boss, but her willingness, her body, her surgery, her recovery, is what made the chain work. Without Deborah saying yes, Jackie wouldn't get that transplant. The surgery happened on October 10th of 2011, and it did not go well. Deborah said she hadn't fully understood the extent of what the surgery would involve, and afterward, she was in severe pain. She had discomfort in her legs, she had digestive problems, and this was kind of complications that don't just fade after a few days of rest, right? And most doctors would say you need at least 4 to 6 weeks. With even lifting restrictions that can last 6 weeks or more, this was a major surgery with real recovery time. But Deborah said she felt pressured to come back to work before she was ready, and so she went back. September 6th was less than 4 weeks after having a kidney removed. 3 days later, she went home sick. And that's when the phone rang. It was Jackie, her boss, the woman whose life she had just helped save. According to Deborah, the call wasn't to check in on her. It wasn't to ask her how she was feeling. It was to berate her for leaving work early. Deborah said that Jackie told her, "You can't come and go as you please. People are going to think you're getting special treatment." Like, special treatment? She donated a kidney for her boss and called it special treatment. Let that sit for a second. And from that point on, according to Deborah and the legal filings that followed, things only got worse. She described it being yelled at in front of coworkers over alleged mistakes, constant conflict, a work environment that had gone from collegial to hostile almost overnight. And then came the punishment that wasn't even trying to be subtle. Her office was taken away, her overtime was cut, and she was reassigned. She was transferred to a dealership 50 miles from her home. The new location was in a rough area, and her coworkers even called it Siberia. Stevens said the stress became so severe that she started seeing a psychiatrist. She was falling apart, not from the surgery, right, but from everything that was happening after it. The person she had sacrificed for, in her telling, was making her life unbearable. Eventually, she hired an employment lawyer. Her attorney sent a letter to the company, and within a week of that letter being delivered, she was fired. Now, Jackie never commented publicly, but her husband, James, did, and he told reporters that Deborah's claims were far from the truth. He didn't elaborate, he just said she didn't fire anybody. Atlantic Automotive Group called the allegations groundless and said the company had treated Deborah honorably and fairly at every turn. So that's one side saying she was punished for donating a kidney, and the other side saying none of it happened. And normally that's where a story like this would just dissolve, like the he said, she said, and everyone moves on. But the state of New York didn't move on. But in April of 2012, Deborah filed a discrimination complaint. And in October of that year, the state issued a finding, probable cause to believe that discrimination had occurred. Now, probable cause isn't a verdict. It doesn't mean the case was proven. It just means investigators looked at the evidence and found enough there to believe something may have gone wrong. It's the line between we're looking into it and this needs a hearing. And that hearing never happened. The state process was paused so Deborah could take the fight to federal court. In June of 2013, she filed her case, Stevens vs. Atlantic Automotive Group. The case was built around the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then, on July 1st of 2014, nearly 3 years after the surgery, the case was settled during a conference before a federal magistrate judge. The court record says the matter was now settled. Shortly after, the case was dismissed with prejudice. Over. Done. But what were the settlement terms? They were confidential. No dollar amount, no apology, no admission of wrongdoing, nothing on the public record that tells you what it all added up to. And that's the ending. Not a courtroom scene, not a public vindication, not a moment where someone stood up and said, what happened to this woman was wrong. Just a sealed document and a closed case. In every other story we've talked about today, the good deed was something external, buying someone breakfast, pulling a stranger from the water, reporting fraud, protecting patients, and this one was physical. Debbie Stevens let a surgeon remove a piece of her body so that a woman she worked for, the person who controlled her schedule, her paycheck, her daily life, could survive. And according to her, the reward was being screamed at, demoted, shipped off to Siberia, and fired. There's no policy manual that covers this. There's no PR playbook that makes it okay. There's just a woman with one kidney, no job, and a settlement she's not allowed to talk about. But here's the thing. When reporters asked Deborah if she regretted it, after everything, after the surgery, the complications, the retaliation, the firing, and the years of legal battle, She said no. I have no regrets because it saved a man's life in Missouri. Not her boss's life. The stranger in Missouri. The person she never met. The person on the other end of the chain who got her kidney. That's who she was thinking about, even at the end of all of this. 5 stories, 5 people who saw someone in trouble and didn't look away. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And that's exactly what all these people had. Good intentions. A server who bought a man breakfast, a lifeguard who saved a life, a manager who told the truth, a doctor who fought for their patients, and a woman who gave up a kidney. Good intentions, every single one of them, and every single one of them was met with hell to pay. I guess that's why they say no good deed goes unpunished. But here's what gets me, right? Most of these stories only exist because someone had to talk about it. A GoFundMe page, a local news segment, a post that went viral at the right moment. The second people were watching, the system scrambled to correct itself. Jobs were offered back, statements were released, and settlements were signed. But the fix only came because of the spotlight, not because of the conscience. And that's the part that keeps people up at night, maybe. Because if the spotlight is the only thing that makes the system do the right thing, how many people did the right thing this week and got quietly punished for it? No cameras, no headlines, no public outrage, just a phone call and a closed door. And we tell people to do the right thing. We say it all the time. We teach it to our kids. We put it on posters and in handbooks and in mission statements. But when someone actually does it, when someone puts themselves on the line, not for attention, not for a reward, but because they saw something that needed doing and they couldn't look away, we should be honest about what happens next. And you just watched what happens next.